Thanks to you at home as well for joining us this hour. Happy to have you here. By this time next week, Congress will have completed the first two public hearings in the impeachment proceedings against President Donald Trump. The first one's going to happen on Wednesday. I will tell you, one of the things I did today is I just cleared my Wednesday morning calendar. We think these hearings are planned to start at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So if you've got something you were planning on doing mid-morning on Wednesday, now's the time to find that little tiny bottle of liquid paper you keep in your third drawer to white out whatever else you had on your calendar that day. We know that the first hearing, that Wednesday hearing, is going to be dramatic, if only because it's the first hearing. I mean, there just haven't been very many public impeachment proceedings against sitting presidents of the United States in our history. And so Wednesday is going to be exciting, if only because it's such a historic occasion. But in terms of the specifics, we know that day we'll hear from Ambassador Bill Taylor and from the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, George Kent. Now, over the course of these past few days, we have received transcripts from each of the depositions that those officials gave behind closed doors in the initial phase of this impeachment inquiry, which took place behind closed doors. And we've talked a little bit on the show this week about the strength of Taylor and Kent's testimony, the basic claims that Taylor and Kent are able to attest to as witnesses. Because we've seen their deposition transcripts, we fully expect that their testimony is going to be strong and dramatic and will sort of set the broad frame for what the president is being impeached for. But then after that first hearing on Wednesday, there's going to be a second hearing on Friday. That one will have as a witness the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, who's firing as our ambassador in that country, appears to have been part of the scheme that President Trump was trying to carry out in Ukraine, pressuring that country to gin up investigations that he hoped could help him in his reelection effort against the Democrats. And we don't yet know who the other witnesses will be that the House is going to call for public testimony at these public hearings, nor do we know at this point how many public impeachment hearings there's going to be. But today, they released two more transcripts from closed-door depositions by Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. We know that from public reporting that Colonel Vindman has already offered to testify at a public hearing if the House impeachment committees decide that they want him to do so. Based on the transcript released from his closed-door testimony today, it seems like a good bet that they will want him to testify. We also got a very long transcript today from Fiona Hill. She is a very interesting character in this drama. And now that we have seen her testimony, the testimony that we got released from her today, I don't know if you'd call it desperate, but I am close to desperate to know whether or not the impeachment committees are going to call Fiona Hill to testify at a public hearing as well. Because Fiona Hill was the top Russia expert at the National Security Council. As such, she was deeply involved in Ukraine issues. Russia is at war in Ukraine. She has testified in detail about witnessing what should have been a normal policy process toward Ukraine, basically getting hot-wired and turned into this whole other thing that was apparently designed to benefit President Trump's reelection prospects instead of benefiting what it was supposed to be U.S. policy toward Ukraine. Fiona Hill is the one who gave us that vivid account of what happened inside the White House when the three amigos, when the president's agents in this scheme stepped in and tried to pervert the whole process of the U.S. government engaging with the government of Ukraine, to pervert that process so that it instead would be turned to benefit President Trump politically. And I am starting to gather that the defense now will be, the president's defense, the president's supporters in Congress, their defense is going to be that what the president did and what the president had these officials do on his behalf was totally normal. It's the kind of stuff that governments do all the time. Why are you trying to make this a bad thing now that it's President Trump doing it? Everybody does stuff like this. Well, it's Fiona Hill's account of how this all played in the White House that absolutely gives lie to that. That shows that this is not at all the way that normal government interactions happen with a foreign government, particularly a government like Ukraine. What the president did was both weird and shocking and objected to instantly by people, by nonpartisan career folks who know how these things are supposed to work. Here's her talking about a meeting at the White House on July 10th. She said, quote, Ambassador Sondland blurted out, well, we have an agreement with the chief of staff, meaning White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, for a meeting if these investigations in the energy sector start. Hill said, quote, we all kind of looked up and thought that was somewhat odd. And Ambassador Bolton, the National Security Advisor John Bolton, immediately stiffened and he ended the meeting. Question to Fiona Hill. Right then, he just ended the meeting? Answer. Yeah, he said, well, it was very nice to meet you. I can't discuss a meeting at this time. She said it was, quote, very abrupt. Question. And did you have a conversation with Ambassador Bolton after this meeting? Answer. I did. Question. Describe that. Answer. Ambassador Sondland said to Ambassador Kurt Volker and also Secretary of Energy Rick Perry and the other people who were with him, including the Ukrainians, to come down to a room in the White House, the Ward Room, to basically talk about next steps. That is also unusual. I mean, he meant to talk to the Ukrainians about next steps about the meeting? Question, the White House meeting? Answer, yes, the White House meeting, meaning the White House meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky, which Gordon Sondland had just blurted out could only happen, that meeting could only happen if Ukraine started these investigations. He just said it explicitly and said it had all been arranged already through White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. Hill says, quote, Bolton pulled me back as I was walking out afterwards and said, go down to the Ward Room right now and find out what they are talking about and come back and talk to me. So I did go down. And Ambassador Sondland, in front of the Ukrainians, as I came in, was talking about how we had an agreement with Chief of Staff Mulvaney for a meeting with the Ukrainians if they were going to go forward with investigations. My director for Ukraine, she says, quote, was looking completely alarmed. We believe the director for Ukraine in this context is Colonel Alexander Vindman from the National Security Council, who sits at the Ukraine desk there. He's looking, quote, completely alarmed. Fiona Hill says, quote, I came in as this discussion was underway, and I said, look, I don't know what is going on here. Look, I don't know what is going on here, but Ambassador Bolton wants to make it very clear that we have to talk about how we are going to set up this meeting. It has to go through proper procedures. And Sondland started to basically talk about discussions that he'd had with the chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney. He mentioned Mr. Giuliani. But then I cut him off because I did not want to get further into this discussion at all. Question. So it was you personally who heard Ambassador Sondland mention Burisma? Correct. In the Ward Room? Correct. And Mr. Vindman was also there and heard it? Yes. And Kurt Volker. Oh. And then after that, in her testimony, she gives the part you've probably already seen in a few headlines. She says after this, crime scene that she basically just witnessed in the White House, she, as instructed, went back to go talk to her boss, National Security Advisor John Bolton. She says, quote, I went back to talk to Ambassador Bolton, and Ambassador Bolton asked me to go over and report this to the National Security Council's lawyer, to John Eisenberg. He told me, and this is a direct quote from Ambassador Bolton, you go and tell him. You would go and tell Eisenberg, I am not part of whatever drug deal Sondland and Mulvaney are cooking up on this. And you go and tell him what you've heard. So this is already the kind of stuff that they've got from their closed-door depositions, which they're now one by one releasing publicly, right? We're getting hundreds of pages of these depositions released every day. That's why I have these circles under my eyes. But all this material that we've got, it shows you, as we're heading toward the public impeachment hearings next week, it shows you now that we're seeing these transcripts, among other things, how they put together their witness list, right? They're like, you saw what? And who else was there? And they saw it too? Can we talk to them? It's like the world's simplest detective novel. This is like Clue, where there's only 3 cards, right? You already know who done it and when and why and in front of whom. Like, we just have to figure out if they used a candlestick and where Professor Plum was. I mean, it's done. It's all there. But there is another piece of this that I now understand that I'm not sure I did before today, before reading the Fiona Hill 400-plus page long transcript. And this thing is, I think, important to try to get our heads around, just as members of the public who are going to be watching this thing. I think it's at least helpful to get our heads around this before those public hearings start next week. And that point that I finally sort of figured out today, and maybe everybody else got this before me, But what has finally sunk in for me is that, the questioning at these hearings is going to be done at least a little bit by the committee chairman who's leading the impeachment inquiry, by Congressman Adam Schiff. He's a former prosecutor. He's very sober and restrained. You have heard him in congressional hearings. You know what he's like. We also know that on both sides, they're going to defer a lot of their question time to professional committee staff who are also well-trained lawyers who are going to be able to sort of draw this out Perry Mason style over the course of continuous questioning that isn't broken up into little blocks like we've seen with other dissatisfying hearings, or the questioning's all done by members of Congress. But it's not just going to be the majority members and the majority committee staff, right? It's not only the Democrats who are going to be asking the questions here. The Republicans will get their equal time, too, both their members and their staff. And what I'm finally realizing is I think that might be the best part. And we know the Republicans are kind of panicking about who they've got on the impeachment committees. There is a Republican congressman named Devin Nunes who has become kind of a figure of fun. He's like suing somebody who pretends to be his cow and maintains a Twitter account in that guise. He's suing the fake cow on Twitter. It's a little weird. Devin Nunes ran for office this last time saying that he's a farmer. He's a farmer, if so, who doesn't have a farm. I mean, he's the one who ran up to the White House with that evidence at the beginning of the Russia investigation and said the whole thing about, Trump Tower being wiretapped. I mean, Devin Nunes is supposedly their top man on the main impeachment committee, which is House Intel. They appear to be swapping Devin Nunes out now for a different member of Congress, a different Republican named Jim Jordan. But I just want you to check this out, because one of the things we now know is that in this case, in the Fiona Hill deposition, Jim Jordan's top staffer is doing a bunch of the questioning in these depositions. And I think it ultimately epitomizes what the Republicans are going to try to do here, which is that they're basically trying to continue the scheme for which President Trump is being impeached. Apparently, the way they are approaching this is that they really want to try to make the case that, you know what? Russia didn't interfere in the 2016 election. Actually, it was Ukraine trying to help Hillary Clinton. And you know what? They were all trying to help Hillary Clinton. And that's why Hillary Clinton lost. And Paul Manafort was framed. Paul Manafort definitely didn't take all those off-the-books millions of dollars from pro-Putin political parties in Ukraine and then not pay taxes on it here in the United States. He was set up. And the reason he was set up was to make Russia look bad. I mean, it's weird. Like, the counter argument here is weird, but it's apparently what they're going for, including like the setting up Paul Manafort part. And I don't know if they're going to call Fiona Hill as one of the public hearing witnesses, but I just want you to see how she handled this in the closed-door depositions thus far. Just check this out. Here she is in a back and forth with a Republican committee staffer who works for Jim Jordan, who is presumably going to be like the best the Republicans have got at these public hearings. Question: are you aware of the allegation? There's been some reporting. There was a big article in 2017 about Ukrainians' efforts to affect the outcome of the election, the U.S. election. Answer: I'm aware of the articles. Question: and do you give any credibility to some of the basic charges in there, such as redacted? Are you familiar with that? Would it be helpful if we marked this as an exhibit, this article? Answer: I've seen that article. Question: okay. Answer: and I am very confident, based on all of the analysis that has been done, and again, I don't want to start getting into intelligence matters, but I am very confident the Ukrainian government did not interfere in our election in 2016. Question: okay, but you're aware of the reporting? Answer: I'm aware of the reporting, but that doesn't mean that amounts to an operation by the Ukrainian government. Fiona Hill, quote, there is no Ukrainian government effort to subvert our elections, which is comparable to anything that the Russians did in 2016. And if we start down this path, not discounting what one individual or a couple of individuals might have done, if we start down this path ahead of our 2020 elections, we are setting ourselves up for the same kind of failures and intelligence failures that we had before. Republican lawyer. Okay. Hill. Look, I feel very strongly about this. The lawyer. Evidently. Hill, I'm not trying to mess about here. Lawyer, evidently. Hill, yes, and so you should too, in terms of our national security. Lawyer, well, let me help you understand here. I'm trying to understand. Fiona Hill, it is a fiction that the Ukrainian government was launching an effort to upend our election, to mess with our democratic systems. Republican lawyer, okay. Hill, I'm not sure where we're going with this line of inquiry here. Lawyer, I'm just asking you about Hill, because if you're trying to peddle an alternative variation of whether the Ukrainians subverted our election, I don't want to be part of that, and I will not be part of it. Lawyer, I'm not trying to peddle anything. Fiona Hill, well, it's the thrust of the question that you're asking here. You know, what we're dealing with now is a situation where we are at risk of saying that everything that happened in 2016 was a result of Ukraine in some fashion. Lawyer, yeah, I'm not saying that. I'm not. Hill, well, that's certainly what it sounds like to me. The lawyer, I'm not going down that path. Fiona Hill, the Russians are the government that have been proven from the very top to be targeting our democratic systems. Republican lawyer, okay, fair enough. Hill, and I'm sorry to be very passionate, but this is precisely, the lawyer, I'm just trying to get your Fiona Hill. This is precisely why I joined the administration. I didn't join it because I thought the Ukrainians had been going after the president. Lawyer, I didn't say you did. I'm just trying to get your reaction to Fiona Hill. Well, my reaction obviously is pretty strong because, again, the lawyer, I know, again, I'm extremely concerned that this is a rabbit hole that we are going to go down here, that we are going to go down in between now and the 2020 elections, and it will be to all of our detriment. I am just trying to basically say here that I have very obviously strong feelings about our national security and just want to, if I have done anything, she says, if I have done anything, I want to leave a message to you that we should all be greatly concerned about what the Russians intend to do in 2020, and any information that they can provide, you know, that basically deflects our attention away from what they did and what they're planning on doing, that is very useful to them. That is useful to them. That is useful to the Russians. What you're doing here with this disinformation and these conspiracy theories that just happen to exonerate Russia for what they did, I mean, this is a portrait of Fiona Hill, but this is a portrait of Republican members of Congress and these top Republican staffers and the way they're going to approach the impeachment inquiry. They're trying to talk Fiona Hill, this veteran Russia intelligence officer, trying to talk her into the idea that really, wasn't President Trump onto something here? Don't you agree that maybe Ukraine is the one who intervened in our election, not Russia, and they should now cough up these investigations that'll make Hillary Clinton look bad and Joe Biden and all that? I mean, Dr. Hill, wouldn't you say? And she just destroys them, right? And also puts in context authoritatively and with some passion why it's so bad for the United States that the Republicans are approaching it this way. What is so dangerous to our national security and who they are helping by doing this, which is not the United States of America. It's the adversaries that seek to do us the most harm, and they are playing that game for those adversaries. So that's what it's been like behind closed doors so far. The public impeachment hearings start next week, which means it's, you know, showtime in terms of this presidency and the possibility that the House will impeach him and that the Senate will be asked to consider whether to remove him from office. We know heading into next week that the list of witnesses the House has assembled, even just with those first two hearings, is a serious and formidable bunch. If Fiona Hill is any indication from her closed-door deposition, the Republican questioning of these witnesses is going to be a thing to behold.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.